Neil Lampert, why have I got you on the podcast again instead of my mate Gwilym? What have you done with him?
Well, Gwilym is travelling to Singapore, not just to attend the All Asian Patent Attorney Association Congress for CIPA. He's there with President Daniel Chu. But they are both also CIPA's guests at the Earthshot Prize Awards.
Oh, we haven't got a finalist again, have we?
We have got another finalist, and the awards are happening coincidentally in Singapore. So we've got our honorary secretary and our president already in Singapore. So although I was invited, I gave my ticket to them, didn't I? It's the kind of guy.
And you're on the podcast, so you got second best.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we got second best. I'm always pleased to be here, but really exciting that we've got another potential.
Who's our finalist? Remind me, who's our finalist?
It's Colorifics, who are replacing the chemical dyeing process with textile dyeing, basically made from nature, from purely biological processes. So the Earthshot panel really liked what Colorifics do, so we're really hopeful that we've got another winner.
It's really interesting how these coincidences happen, isn't it? Because I listen to a lot of other podcasts. I was listening to a history-based one earlier on in the week, and that was talking about fabrics and dyeing and how through history humans have made it more and more difficult to recycle materials because we've been looking for dyes that are stable, don't fade, and everything that we've produced historically has harmed the environment. And here we are with a nominated finalist who's looking to end all of that. That's got to be good.
There you go. Fingers crossed for Colorifics.
Fingers crossed indeed. So,
and I should just say, nominations are open for the 2024
you should say
prize.
That, yes.
So, if we've got members listening and they're not aware of this, there are 5 £1 million prizes up for grabs every year through this prestigious environmental program run by Prince William and a panel of experts across various environmental and sustainable categories. If you check the CIPA website or your latest CIPA emails, you'll see all the details there and how to nominate clients. But if you do have a client in the sustainable green tech space, please let us know, because you could have an Earthshot Prize winner on your hands.
Cool. And let's hope that we get lots of really good nominations for 2024.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
But we're not here to talk about Earthshot today, are we? We're here to talk about things sciencey and engineering-y, I think is probably the best way to describe it. And so let's get our guest on, shall we? Ben Bleasdale. Ben, hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Lovely to join you both today on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on. So just by way of introduction, do you want to tell us a wee bit about yourself?
So I'm Ben Bleasdale. I work for the Campaign for Science and Engineering, CaSE as we call ourselves. CaSE has been around for about 40 years now almost, and is very much designed to be a voice for science in politics. So we have member organisations which include universities across the country, R&D businesses, learning societies, even unions and things like that of researchers, as well as individual scientists themselves. And we talk to politicians and really try and get them excited and interested about science, engineering, research, and do our best to try and get good policy decisions made so that the sector can really thrive. So, I've been part of the team for a couple of years now and have been starting work on a new area of work called the Discovery Decade, which is looking at actually how the public view the idea of R&D as a political priority, and whether or not they think it should be on manifestos, in elections, stump speeches, things that are going to be very relevant in the next year or so.
Yeah, no, we're coming into a period when that's going to be a key question, aren't we? Before we get into the sort of like the really interesting stuff about CaSE and the project that you're leading, can I just come back to the sort of the aim of CaSE around the sort of influencing and the political dimension? Because you probably won't know this, but we've just spent 2 years, CIPA has just spent 2 years on a fairly intensive political campaign around the UK's accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, which included elements in its IP provisions that would have been possibly injurious to the UK's place in other kind of global IP ecosystems. And that, at the start of that, it was actually, our job was to try and educate MPs and peers and others in our niche area which is, science and engineering is niche, and then the law as it applies to the patenting of scientific and engineering discoveries is even more niche. So we had the task of trying to educate politicians and then trying to get them to make sensible policy decisions based on their new learning. So how easy do you find it, or not easy do you find it?
I mean, it's always a challenge. I think it's, our sector, as you say, has a lot of, quite technical problems that it's grappling with. And at times, the real struggle is that, often R&D, science, engineering, all these things sit out of people's minds. It's something that's kind of, a fairly abstract concept to a lot of the public, as well as, frankly, a lot of MPs. A lot of them stopped doing science when they were 16 and haven't really thought about it much since. And I think one of the things that we really try and do is make it feel accessible, exciting, something that actually people do want to engage with and hear more about, and then use that as a way of talking about, as you say, these really challenging problems that we've got to overcome to help the sector thrive.
So, CaSE then, you touched a wee bit on its history. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the organisation, how it operates, its constituencies?
Yeah, definitely. So we're a small team. There's only 8 of us, but we have around 140 members, I think, now. As I say, spanning lots of different parts of the sector, and we really try and focus our efforts on the issues that really matter to all of them. So, we look at the kind of fundamentals, as I often call them. So things like investment. So how much money is flowing into the system? What does public investment look like in the years to come? We focus on things like visas and immigration. How does the sector have access to the people it needs from abroad? And then things like regulation. So, what are the broad decisions that politicians are making that affect what the sector can do and how it operates? And I mean, I've worked in this sector for a long time and come from a scientific background myself, working in a lab. And I think it's really exciting to be working on some of those really big issues that matter. Often I talk to scientist colleagues and old friends and things still in the lab, and often it's easy to end up focusing just on getting your next grant and how easy it is going to be access funding. And sometimes we miss the big picture, which is how much money is coming into the system, and how much money does UKRI have to spend, and that matters to the individual as much as the whole system as a whole.
You're going to have to forgive me, because as interesting it is to talk about CaSE and CaSE's work, I now need to find out what kind of a scientist you are, because our members will want to know.
I'm a virologist by training, so structural virology. I used to do long days on the microscope, sat in the dark, looking at viruses assembling. So it's a bit of a change working at a desk now, but I do occasionally manage to convince one of our members to let me back into the lab for a refresher, bit of a nostalgic tour around.
You must have found the last few years particularly interesting then. Professionally rewarding, maybe?
Yeah, indeed. Very, very interesting in some ways. I think I must admit that I think my family perhaps oversold how much I knew about the ins and outs of COVID response, just because I'd worked on viruses. So, there was a lot of kind of reminding them that, as you say, science is niche on niche, right? So I said, well, if it's about this particular protein in this particular virus, then I can definitely help. But unfortunately, that's not COVID.
So Neil, you've been sat there quite quietly, mate, for most of the podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how CIPA and CaSE can sort of work together, how we engage?
Well, we've already started to have conversations. I mean, a lot of our messaging is similar, and I'm kind of interested actually in Ben's thoughts on to what extent he would agree with our proposition that we have in much of our PR and our messaging, that R&D and IP protection can together form a virtuous circle, because what we say is that protecting innovation through patenting and other IP protection can help maximize profits, which can then be reinvested back into R&D. And so once you get innovative companies operating this kind of model, it can be a virtuous circle.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think from our perspective, I couldn't agree more that I think ensuring that, as you say, the kind of value of innovation and new ideas is really captured. I think there's going to be an enormous focus on that in the coming years. Whatever happens with the election and whichever government comes in, there is a desire to see, I think, R&D really deliver, benefits and economic boosts for the UK. And a lot of that comes down to having the right structures in place to give entrepreneurs the protection and the reassurance to be able to go out there and come up with new ideas. And I'm very excited about the election is likely to kind of lead to a bit of a spur, kind of a bit of fresh energy to try and think about, well, what is it that the UK is really good at? And law is undoubtedly right at the top of that list, I think. And I think being able to bring that together with the strength in science and R&D and try and think about how you weave that together to keep value, in the UK, to make sure that we're able to extract that, commercialize things, have the protections that people need. I think it's really interesting. And then I think the challenge is going to be relaying that to the public as well, so the voting public, to kind of really see the fact that that is delivering a stronger economy, more money for public services, it's boosting jobs, it's creating kind of wealth across the UK. So yeah, I completely agree. I think the mission that you've got in terms of making that work is absolutely critical, because these, again, complex issues, and if we just let them kind of bobble along, they tend to not work as well as they could. And I think having your organization's kind of focused voice in that can really help us get that system tuned up and working at its best.
Yeah, that sounds really good. It's always a tough task, though, isn't it? Yeah, it's been a long time since I've had any meaty issue to think about in the run up to an election, because we've not had a properly contested election for some time now, have we? But it feels like this one is one where we can really get focused on issues around the economy and what fuels the economy. And if it's not science, engineering, and the protection of invention, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you say, the UK is, perhaps because of Brexit and wider economic problems, the COVID, I think there's a real sense that we've got to kind of take a big bet on something as a country. We've got to try and work out what we're good at and really double down on that. And I think trying to get all of the pieces right, whether it is the investment that's needed, whether it is, as you say, the kind of structures and the protections that are needed, whether it's access to the right people, all these things I think have got to work in tandem, because you can do, 3/4 of them right, and the last quarter are the one that stops you getting the full benefit. So yeah, it can be a really interesting time, I do think, the next kind of 12 or 18 months.
We do seem to be quite good at innovation in this country. I mean, we've just finished 4th, again, I think, in WIPO's, the World Intellectual Property Organization's Global Innovation Index, which measures innovation against sort of key indices such as institutions, infrastructure, business sophistication, these sorts of things. So we've clearly got key elements of a successful innovation economy in place. And I know that one of the government's key interests is supporting innovative SMEs. And I know worry here, our incoming president, Matt Dixon, will be making points about SMEs and how successful SMEs that own patents are compared to those that don't own registered IP rights. So I'm kind of interested in how you might be influencing the kind of landscape for the benefit of SMEs, really, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're lucky to have quite a few SMEs in our membership, as well as some of the kind of umbrella bodies that represent larger groups of them. And I think for us, it's actually one of the biggest selling points of the sector politically. It's probably the area that I think gets politicians most excited, because it feels like something they can really, get their head around. They can really kind of imagine what that looks like. It's a chance for them to come and meet people often as well. And you get some fantastic ambassadors for the sector in, SME leaders. And I think one of the big challenges our sector has is, particularly with politicians, but also with the public, is a very stereotypical view of who works in it. It's your kind of crazy haired old scientist. And actually what we really want to kind of say is actually, no, it's entrepreneurs, it's people building their own companies, people who've got their stake in the game. They're really they're building this themselves. And I think that's a face of the sector that completely changes how the politicians view it. Suddenly it becomes something exciting and kind of dynamic. And at the same time, for the public, we want people to look at the science sector and think, oh, there's some interesting jobs there. There's a career for me. There's an exciting future that I might want to be part of. And,
Exactly.
Unfortunately, kind of fusty, kind of dusty old science, not kind of views of it, of kind of people in labs, playing with test tube, doesn't always get people excited. But actually, we've had the AI summit this week. There's examples there of kind of really cutting edge tech and what that actually looks like in the modern day. I think the more we can get that across, particularly to young people, I think the better the future of the sector will be.
I'm conscious that Ben's come on here to really talk about Discovery Decade, which I'll admit, Ben, I don't know much about. So I'm as interested to learn as our listeners will be. So tell us all about it.
I'd be delighted to, Lee. Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I say, traditionally, CaSE has very much worked in this space of talking to the politicians, working with our members, getting kind of the voice across. And I'd politely characterize a lot of the way we work is often kind of what I call logic-led arguments. We're kind of making the case that you put your pound in here and you get your X many pounds out here, or you fix this and you'll get more people coming to the UK. And it's worked very well and it's very useful. And I think what we wanted to do with the Discovery Decade work was complement that with a sense of what's the bigger picture for the public? You know, the public are not going to be suddenly motivated by a return on investment figure or a particular white paper on something. They want to know why we're doing this full stop. Why is it exciting? Why is it a source of hope and optimism for the UK's future? So the Discovery Decade work, the strapline is that we're trying to make R&D matter to more people. And what we've been doing is going out into the field and actually asking the public themselves, what do you think about science as a social or political priority? You know, what do you think about investing public money in it versus other real priorities, you know, filling potholes or fixing schools? And really trying to get to the bottom of how we can better represent the choice of R&D as a political issue and get people excited about that. And it's been fantastic. It's the first time we've really had extensive data on this. So a lot of the sector, and I'm guilty of this too, relying a lot on kind of intuition and what we think, you know, is the best argument for R&D. And that's always a risk when you come from within the sector, because it's stocked full of people who like science and find it very, you know, kind of driving. And actually, most of the public, I often say to people, I reckon that most of the public think about science for 30 seconds a year. So what do we want in that 30 seconds? It really matters. So we've been out running nationally representative polls. We've polled over 20,000 people now in what I believe is the largest study ever of its kind done in the UK in this area. We've run focus groups up and down the country. I've sat down with people from different areas, different backgrounds, and heard in their own words them describe what they see science as and what it's for and who they think does it. And we've been collating all of that evidence, all that data into a huge open access resource that we put online, with the idea of trying to get our sector as a whole to think carefully about how different parts of the public respond to the way we talk about R&D and the stories we tell, and can we fine-tune the way we work to reach more people and make R&D matter to more people.
So you said that you've been out talking to people and particularly interested in the polling that you've done. What have you learned?
A huge amount, I'll be honest, and a lot of it has certainly changed my view of what I thought the situation was. I think, you know, the data has really kind of brought out this idea of a central dilemma for R&D as an issue, as a cause. And there's some good news and bad news in it. The good news is that people's kind of innate feeling about the idea of R&D is actually pretty positive. So, you know, if you ask people in national polls, you know, 70% of people will say that they think R&D sounds like an important thing for the government to invest in. That's a fantastic result. We see that it has cross-party support. So whichever party you vote for, you're actually pretty likely to support the idea of R&D as this important, worthy cause. The flip side, however, is that R&D really struggles to feel urgent. And I think that's particularly felt at the moment with the cost of living pressures, you know, national finance pressures in the news. I think there's a real sense that, yes, R&D feels like an important issue, definitely worth the money at times, but actually, is it the one for right now? Is it something that we should wait for? And actually, you know, a third of people say they can think of no or very few ways that R&D improves their lives, which is staggering if you think about that most people were filling in our survey on a mobile phone. So I think there's a real challenge for us to bring up the kind of sense of the benefits, but also there's a real sense of people saying that there's just more pressing issues right now. And, you know, at the moment we're heading towards around £20 billion a year of public money being spent on R&D. That is an enormous amount of cash. And I think that requires a similarly sized justification. And at the moment, for the most of the public, that justification just isn't there. It's just not strong enough to warrant that amount of investment.
And presumably that means that you must, from that, draw some conclusions about your own messaging, about how you need to set out the case for different audiences. So who are your audiences, and how do those messages differ across those audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been benefiting from the scale of this data in that we can actually look at quite small audiences and quite different groups in society. So, you know, we can split by where you live, whether or not it's part of the country or whether you live in the city or the rural countryside. We can look at what types of jobs you do, your education, your income, all those sorts of things, your age. And I think it's been fascinating looking at which factors amongst those actually drive support for R&D versus not. The one that really surprised me and went absolutely against my hypothesis, which is why data is always helpful, I guess, was age. So the biggest differentiator of opinion in this country on R&D is age. And if you are younger, you're far more skeptical about whether or not R&D is a political priority. Absolutely the opposite of what I expected to hear.
Yeah, no, I'd have thought the same. Yeah.
So, wow. You know, if you're under 45, and so I'm calling it young, I'm being generous to what I call young, but like, you know, if you're in an age...
That's young.
Younger than us, Lee.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're under 45, you're far more skeptical about the idea of R&D as a investment for taxpayers' money. You're more likely to say that there are more pressing issues that need to take priority. You're more likely to believe that the UK doesn't need to invest in this because we can use the benefits that accrue from other countries. We'll just take those innovations. You're more likely to say that you don't benefit from R&D. And I think there's a real shock for me, actually, that the idea of the concept of technology, innovation, new ideas is not sparking excitement amongst that group. And actually, there's a real sense of pessimism, frankly, at the moment about whether or not R&D is useful for fixing problems, or things like climate change or the future of the NHS. That group do not see that link at the moment. And I think the big challenge for us is trying to overcome that barrier and try and make that link, because the data does helpfully point to the fact that those groups can become supporters. They can really see value in it, but only if we're talking about R&D in the right ways.
So why is it important for them to engage? Why, if this stuff's going to happen anyway, if the investment's going to happen, why do we need the public to be more aware than perhaps they are?
I think there's a challenge inherently in the last few years, actually, R&D has really gone up the political, kind of hierarchy of priorities, which is fantastic for our sector. And I think partly that's been driven by things like Brexit, a desire to boost productivity. But my concern is that it is a manifesto issue, but it's not a doorstep issue. And that is a very delicate place to be, because all it takes is a few political champions to disappear. And we don't have massive support across the political base. What we have is a few well-placed supporters in government who see this as a priority and luckily support it. But as we've seen in the last few years, you cannot rely on the same characters hanging around for very long. So our concern is that unless the public want to hear politicians talk about it, and I'm not expecting R&D to be a doorstep issue that, Joe Bloggs says, I want to see you invest more in science. But what I would like to see is a situation where people see a natural link to R&D as a tool for fixing the things they do care about. So it feels very natural for politicians to talk about technology and innovation as a solution to whatever issue they are championing that day.
I just wonder if I could just loop us back to that point that Ben was making about climate change and the importance of R&D and innovation to tackle climate change. Because just reading some of your reports this morning, Ben, I see that there is a recognition amongst some people, maybe not young people, surprisingly, but amongst many, that R&D is a relevant tool for solving or tackling climate change.
Absolutely.
So, can you square that circle for us? What you were saying that young people don't see R&D as important. I would assume that young people are the most engaged on climate change issues.
Absolutely. And I think actually the way that we found that really gets that group to convert into supporters is by bringing back R&D's link to big issues, big problems in society like that. And as you say, there's actually a pretty good starting base of, if you ask people, do you think R&D is relevant as a tool for fixing these issues? Quite a lot of people say yes, whether that is climate change or health, future of healthcare, cost of living even. People say, I can see it could be useful. I think the challenge is demonstrating that it should be on the top of that list as a tool, because a lot of people, particularly in those younger age groups, are inclined to look for more immediate solutions. So they say, we're trying to fix climate change, build more wind turbines. Don't worry about developing new ones, just build more of the ones we've got. And I think that's a very valid viewpoint. And that's a challenge for our sector to say, yes, we definitely need to be taking action now on these big issues, but solving them in the long run is going to involve some new ideas and technologies that we just don't have right now. So we've really got to invest for those now, and trying to kind of get both of those sides of the argument into people's mindsets, and to kind of say, actually, we need to do both of them, because otherwise there is that inclination to kind of take away the R&D money because you feel like you get bigger bang for your buck just by building more stuff right now. But actually, we're trying to get across that is a false economy in the long run. And actually that will leave us in a poorer position to fix these problems if we aren't really trying to come up with new ideas.
And I'm sat here thinking, now this is probably a daft way to take this, but that's one of my jobs on the podcast, is to ask the daft questions. I'm an avid watcher of Question Time. And any listening to kind of any questions on the radio and the like. I don't think I can ever remember a member of the public, be they a genuine member of the public or a plant, ever asking a question about R&D in any of those fora. So is that something we should be hearing more of, the kind of the public discourse?
I would love that. That would be my dream, is to have someone, come up with a question on their own on Question Time. I think, and we have to remember that is what really gets politicians' attention as well. So that sort of engagement has a massive effect on their willingness to then listen to what we need as a sector and the technical asks. You've got to buy them in first to the idea and principle of it being a priority at all. So we're really keen to think about how we can not just get R&D on the public's radar, but actually also bring that interest to a level where people want to take action on it. It's not just a passive like, oh, I know, I've heard about that, sounds good, carry on, but actually gets more of the public interest space where they say, no, actually, if I'm not seeing the government do it, I'm going to ask them. I want to see this happen. And I think the way to do that, as I say, is to link it to stuff that people do already care about. Because I think R&D and science on its own, it's never going to be an issue that people are going to stick their hand up and ask a question about. But what we can do is get to a place where people say, well, you said innovation was going to be a key part of the net zero, commitments. Are you keeping up with the investment you said? Or, I hear that science and innovation are going to be the jobs of tomorrow, and I want my kids to be in those jobs. Are you investing in that sector's future and education and skills so that kids can get those jobs? And I think it's things like that we've found already in our work are really compelling, and they bring out a set of supporters that at the moment science does not tap into. We don't motivate them in order to kind of stand up and shout on our behalf. And my hope with this project is we call it the Discovery Decade because I think it's a decade-long process of trying to really reach the public in different ways. But at the end of that, I really hope what we find ourselves with is a new set of supporters who are partners in that advocacy, that we're not having to be the sector that makes its own case all the time, but actually we can turn to the public to say, people want this, people want to see this happen, they want to see the impact that we're offering them.
And is there a place for the discussion? So I'm thinking one of the areas where CIPA struggles is in the awareness of the patent attorney profession in further and higher education institutions, where it's a fairly small profession. It's not terribly visible. It's not something that people they don't learn about IP. Let alone the patent attorney profession. So we're continually thinking about ways that we can engage with higher education in the main, but also further education. Is there a work that you are doing or could be doing to make this conversation happen in universities and colleges?
Absolutely, and we're really keen that this whole project tries to drive a visibility for the sector amongst different groups. And as you say, reaching young people in universities, colleges, I think is the key moment where people are thinking about career paths, they're thinking about opportunities, they're thinking also about what matters to them in society and what they think are our priorities. So we've had a really fantastic engagement actually with universities and colleges across the country. And, they really benefit as well from being locally rooted. A lot of the problems that science comes up against as a sector is that people struggle to articulate where it happens, both geographically, but also the types of institutions. It just feels like this amorphous activity that you occasionally see on the 10 o'clock news in a lab, and you're like, well, that sounds nice, but you don't associate it with happening down the road from you. So, we ask people, and 2/3 of people say they know nothing about the R&D that's happening in their area. And bear in mind, we have a university in almost every major town in the country. That's a real failure, I think, on our sector to get across what we're doing.
Yeah, particularly because universities have R&D centres, by and large. Yeah, that's what they're there for.
This is it, yeah. And very low visibility of that. And it's a real shame because we did some of the most interesting testing we did actually in the polls was the idea of people wanting R&D in their communities. So, is it something that people are actually quite happy to just have as this abstract thing in the distance? Or is it something they would be, yeah, exactly, yeah. Or do people actually care about it? And we did some polling a couple of weeks ago, actually, where we asked people, how would you feel about having an R&D lab opening up on your high street? And would you welcome that or not? And it was overwhelmingly popular, far above other issues. And so, we tested other things like job creation, examples. So like, how would you feel about having a factory or things like that? Things that were going to create jobs in your high street. We tested amenities like shopping centres, train stations and things. And actually what people really, really wanted more than almost any of the other options was an R&D lab. And I think it's driven by people seeing it as something that's you feel proud to have in your community, that would create good, lasting jobs, that would actually bring life back to the high street. And, we asked it purposely because there's some really interesting examples going on right now of converting old commercial space into lab space because there's such demand for it. And that is bringing science from, your science park and your university campus onto the high street. And we're in Stevenage in a couple of weeks, working with a group who are doing exactly that, moving R&D onto the high street. And I think it's an old Wilco's. And I think it's a fascinating change for the UK. How will the public react to that? Is it that they will say, "Oh, I'd rather have a Boots," or is it that people will look at this and say, "Actually, no, this is a different, a different future for the UK. I'm really pleased that this is right here, and I can see it, and I can see the people who work in it, and I can much better imagine what they're doing." So I'm really excited about that transition as we perhaps start to see repurposed commercial spaces becoming hubs of science on a high street. I think I really don't know what direction it will go and how the public will react.
Yeah,
Well,
we don't have a big high. We don't have a big high street where I am, but I'm quite interested now walking along and seeing some kind of R&D lab there where the Wilco. So maybe that's where it go. Go on, Neil. Sorry, you're going to come in.
I was just going to say that we've already got in this country, haven't we, incredibly successful, world-leading tech clusters and R&D sort of centres, particularly around Cambridge and Oxford. So if that skill set started to emerge around the country, that there's a real inclusivity and diversity win there, isn't there, for society as well as for
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's really exciting to think what R&D means in specific places and how that differs. Because as you say, these clusters, these kind of hubs of particular types of science, there's a really exciting kind of story to tell there that is different from the next town over. And I think we've been doing, as well as this kind of national strategy about how we can communicate R&D and reach new groups, the other bit of work we've been doing is doing local messaging strategies. So we were in Belfast earlier in the summer. We are in Stevenage in a few weeks' time, and then we're up in Greater Manchester, working with, up in Manchester, working with the mayoral authority, getting together all of the different R&D organisations in that area and saying, what is it in Greater Manchester that's different from Liverpool, from Sheffield, from Birmingham, from London? What is it? All these investments, private, charitable, public, what are they adding up to for the people of Manchester? What does it mean for the future of the city? Where does R&D fit in the brand of Greater Manchester? And doing that as well for Belfast, for Stevenage, places of different scales, different sizes, different nature of the science base. Stevenage doesn't have a big university. It's much more company based. But we're really excited about giving places the chance to sit with us, look at the data, understand what people in their area think about R&D, and then really think about their target audiences. So are there groups in Stevenage or Greater Manchester that they could do more to reach? And how do you pick the right messages to do that? So I completely agree with you, Neil. I think there's some really exciting opportunities to be proud of local differences and see those as a strength. And actually, it would, I think, really allow us to give R&D a feeling of being much closer to people and their communities rather than just something that is sat in a big university that you've never visited. And instead, it's actually something down the road. And that your area is really good at, whether it is, kind of life sciences or nanotech or semiconductors or whatever it is that your area is really good at, that people in the local area can actually talk about that and know about it.
So Ben, one of my jobs on the podcast is to keep an eye on time. And we've been chewing the cud for quite a while now, so I think I'll probably try and bring us to something shaping a conclusion. I've been trying to think what might that conclusion be. Don't worry, Neil, I'm not doing the tangential questions yet, but they are coming. No, they are coming. So we're a little ways off being finished yet. But I wanted to get in it's not a killer question, but for me it's probably the most important question that's formed in my mind whilst we've been talking. So our members, patent attorneys, are probably one of the prime beneficiaries of R&D. Okay, R&D drives invention and discovery. That drives patent applications. That drives infringement. That fuels my economy. So we're big beneficiaries of this. What can we do to help?
I think, in terms of supporting the cause and this work, I think CaSE is obviously already keen to work with organizations across the sector. And if people are working on projects where they think they might have a public audience of some sort, we would love to come and bring our data and say, well, this is who you might be talking to. These are the things that those people already think. So we'd really encourage people to think about the opportunities they have to represent the sector to the public and try and draw on some of the data that we've been collecting. But I think for me, the biggest win that we could really do is try and demonstrate the fact that the careers you're talking about, the jobs that you're talking about, are part of a wider R&D sector. Because I think the more that we can break the mold in the public's mind of what R&D is and what it supports and what it generates, and the opportunities it makes, the more that we can break that, the better, because it will give a whole new swathe of society an interest in it, because they'll say, well, maybe I could do a job in that, or I could have a career, or my kids could have a career in that. So I'm really keen that we try and represent these links in a firmer way, because certainly from the data, the biggest challenge we have is that our sector is really fragmented. People do not associate all these different pockets of work with a sense of R&D as a whole. And I would really love it if we can demonstrate the fact that, actually R&D careers linked to things like IP, law, really exciting things like that, which are quite different from what people might have in mind. So I would really welcome, listeners and the kind of organizations that you work with getting in touch about how we can better strengthen those links and say, actually, this is what innovation is. It's about kind of coming up with ideas, thinking about how you protect those, use them, deploy them. It's loads of different ways, different skill sets, different types of people working on it. And actually, if that's going to be our big bet for the UK in the future, that you can see yourself in it, as an individual, you can say, all right, maybe the lab might not be for me, but actually this kind of legal aspect really appeals to me, and I'd still feel part of this bigger drive of the country moving towards being an innovation economy. So we really welcome working with others.
And I know you probably don't know this, but you've just dangled a nice big hook and worm for Neil to come in, because this floats his boat. That was too many metaphors there, wasn't it? Fishing and sailing.
Yeah, you've got fishing on the brain, haven't you? You're probably going to go out at the weekend. It's already starting to impinge on your thoughts. But yeah, Ben, we've already had a discussion, haven't we, about my grand idea to have some UK Innovation Award programme with support from government. And CIPA did get, what people won't know is that we did get quite close to actually setting something up before the pandemic hit. CIPA had been working for a couple of years on setting up a kind of version of the European Inventor Awards, but in the UK. And we even had a panel of judges recruited, quite an august panel. We'd had the UK Intellectual Property Office on board as supporters. Yeah, we were quite a long way down the line, but we've obviously had to draw back from that over the past couple of years. But the idea's back on the table, and we've had initial discussions, haven't we, about possible support from CaSE, and I'm delighted that you provisionally have said that you'd be happy to support that. But perhaps you could talk a little bit about why you'd support such a scheme and how that would, help with your messaging and, help with messaging in the innovation sector generally, I think.
Absolutely. And we're delighted to be supporting it. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I think it will make a huge difference. We've been really interested actually looking at things like prizes as a mechanism for getting R&D stories out there in a slightly different way. And I think they can be really effective at drawing people's attention to what exciting things are going on in the sector. I think the bit I'm most excited about with the project that you've kind of put together is that it ticks two boxes. One is it's drawing attention to some exciting, cool, novel things, which I think is always a winning way to get kind of attention and get people excited about it. But two, it brings the story back to the people doing it. And that's the big challenge that science has, is that people view it as this kind of humanless process that just keeps coming up with facts. And actually what we could really benefit from is being able to show that there's people, there's teams, there's individuals involved in all these things. And I think things like prizes are a fantastic way of giving those individuals a platform and showing that actually our sector is made up of lots of different types of people doing lots of different types of things. So I'm really excited about the prospect of this. And I think certainly from CaSE's perspective, it's, one really strong opportunity to get more stories about R&D out there. And attach that to the people doing it and make sure that that's the story we're telling is, come and see these cool people doing cool things. I think it's a great sell.
So talking about cool people doing cool things, one of my cool jobs on the podcast is to listen to everything that's been said and try and come up with a question at the end that's not really got anything to do with what we've been talking about, but links to something we've said, okay? And you gave it to me, Ben, when you were talking about the high street. So here's my question. It goes to Neil first, then it'll come to you, and then I'll try and answer it at the end as well. So you talked about the high street and getting R&D hubs into the high street. What other shop or service would you like to be able to see on your high street? You can't bring back anything from the past, though, okay? So you can't resurrect Wilko or Woolworths or anything that we've lost. it needs to be something that you would like to access on your high street that you can't currently. Neil?
Specialist bike shop.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be your answer. You've got Halfords, mate. You've got Halfords.
Yeah, but they don't do good folding bike kind of support or product. Sorry, Halfords. Nothing against Halfords. Sell very good value for money brands. But I'm interested in some of the more niche Japanese varieties of folding bikes, and you just can't. It's very difficult to get spares and parts. So that would be my vote.
Yeah, can't see that happening. So you have to wish that. Go on, Ben. What's your go to on the high street that you can't go to?
I think, if I can't bring back the Woolworth pick and mix, then
we all want that, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. It's greatly missed. Again, I live in a small town, and I think the thing that I really miss on the high street is one of those TARDIS-like DIY shops. You know, the ones where you go in and it just keeps going, and there's more, and it's piled up to the ceiling with stuff, and anything you need, the guy is going to be able to say, "Oh, yeah, I've got one of those at the back."
Got one of those.
Exactly. So
four candles.
Yeah, exactly. So I would love that. I'd love one of those places. I'd spend all day in there.
Yeah. No, we've just lost ours. We had exactly one of those huge cavernous. That it's going to be turned into sort of flats and living accommodation and stuff, and it's such a shame because it was, you could go there for the random screw or bolt or whatever it was. I echo that. So Neil's not going to be surprised where I'm going with this, and it's a bit like his folding bike thing.
It's not a fishing tackle shop, is it?
No, I've got a fishing tackle shop. Okay. They exist. Have you never looked at a high street and seen a fishing tackle shop? But what doesn't exist? So I'm a Mad King squash player. And what doesn't exist is anywhere where you can go and test and buy rackets anymore. So I'm kind of bringing something back, but even then it wasn't on high street. They were kind of randomly placed around the country. So I have to buy my rackets online. And when you come to the end of a kind of a line of a racket that you've been using for ages and you want to try something else, you've got no choice but to just order one and see how you get on with it. And it wouldn't just have to be squash rackets. It could be tennis rackets and stuff like that, and maybe cricket bats. Anything that you could just go and try, bash a ball against the wall or whatever, and get a feel for it. That's what I think is missing.
Very nice. Maybe you never know. Maybe augmented reality will come and save you, and you'll have the ability to test out innovation.
I'm too old. Oh, Ben, thank you so much for spending time with us and talking us through all of the amazing work that you're doing. Obviously, it dovetails so well to our world. Neil, thank you for standing in for Gwilym, as ever. You did an amazing job. Cheers for that. That's a wrap. We're done.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks very much. Fantastic. Thank you.